Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds. Signal Sounds is now ensconced in what can only be described as a synth bunker, with a more expanded range of demo stuff. They've got this thing called natural light. I think they've achieved it with windows, which have been put into the shop in order to cast a sort of pleasing glow over the equipment and a warm, lusty sheen to the staff inside. There are, quite simply, more synths and more other stuff in the store now. And so if you haven't been or aren't aware of the amount of amazing things that they have in Signal Sounds, I honestly don't know what the bloody hell you think you're doing. The post person's been bringing in many additions, including the industrial music electronics Bionic Leicester, the Game Changer Audio Plasma pedals. Those are pedals that literally spit plasma and lightning business through them. And the Waldorf STVC string synths and vocoder. It's based on the Streichfett, which is a bit of a sleeper, and I love it. This is Jason's words. Actually, I agree with him. I actually think the Streichfett is a wonderful synth. It's not terribly well known. They've got them, so you can go and play on one, and many other things, including they're accepting orders for the Buchler Easel Command. They're getting all West Coast up there in the north. All this and more can be yours if you pick up the phone or point your computer at the incredibly awesome synth suppliers that are signalsounds.com. Once again, it's signalsounds.com. Why We Bleep is also sponsored by Eurodesk Z Hex. Do you ever head into your studio only to be distracted by organising your patch cables? The Hex 01 keeps your entire collection of cables within arm's reach, helping you just focus on creative patching. It is literally able to store hundreds of patch cables in one wonderfully small footprint. Jesse sent me one, and it actually has made my life better. Hex 1, one hanger, to store them all. And for a limited time, Jesse will give you 10% off your entire order by using the code Mylar at checkout. Go to eurodesk-z.com. That's code Mylar at eurodesk-z.com. Why? Greets, bud. You okay? Hopefully you are extremely well. Well, I'm extremely well. Pretty much everything's happened in my life since we last spoke. Had a few life events. Few things have been going on, just the one or two little things. It seems that life events are like waiting for buses. About a year ago, I moved from London to Yorkshire and then bought a Skoda, which is definitely a life event. A couple of years previous to that, I got married. And then in these last couple of months, I bought a house, which is pretty awesome. I had to leave London to do it, but I bought one and we've got one. And it's going to need a lot of work, but it's the dream space. Actual space in which I can lay out all the myriad objects that I've accumulated over my life and enjoy them in relative comfort and with gaps of air in between them, so that I can have things like bits of gear set up in little like relationships, little clusters, and have the room to do that, as well as also having the room to have like lights and cameras and tripods and stuff set up around gear to actually film videos, where you don't have to tear your studio apart every single time you want to film something. By God, it'll be easier when we're in the house, which we're not, because unfortunately the house is a bit of a fixer-upper. Though it is awesome. It's kind of a bit grandpa chic at the moment. It's kind of like the inside to a sort of East End boozer from the 1960s right now, except in Leeds. So it's like the inside of a Leeds boozer from the 1960s. But eventually it will be a hipster paradise filled with synthesizers, and I'm looking forward to it. But heck, bit of work to do. But to be honest, that piece of information is not my major life event. Normally it would be, but it was eclipsed by what can only be described as the biggest life event that anyone can possibly encounter. And that's having a baby. Good God. Having a baby. It's remarkable how something that has been done over 107 billion times really is the most spectacular and remarkable miracle that you can experience when it happens to you. I was talking to Mr. Adrian Utley about having kids, and he said something very sweet. He said, in his words, it's effing amazing. And it's very different when it's your kids. Looking after your kids is not the same as looking after other people's annoying kids. It's different. It's the best. And a lot of people I love and respect have said the same thing. It's the best. And I think it is actually the best, I have to say. The moment that Squeebles was removed from his uterine prison and then delivered into our arms, yeah, holy shit. It is quite amazing. And it's taken me several days and weeks and probably the rest of my life to process how amazing it actually is. But it is. And he's a little doll. He's beautiful and extremely sweet. And he's actually been sleeping really well, which is bizarre. And as I said on Instagram when I shared a little picture of him, I want to say something very appropriate to the subject of today's podcast, which is women are fucking amazing. That's it. Women are amazing. I can certainly speak for my wife. The things my wife was able to cope with and almost seemed to savour in the sense that she accepted the challenge that had been put towards her and just took it like a champ. I mean, the other day, I tripped over the dog, fell over, and from the really what can only be described as mild to moderate pain from a sprained ankle, I passed out. I had a psychedelic pass out experience in my chair. And she endured pain and sleep deprivation and exhaustion and did the whole thing while stood up dancing. And at the end of it was smiling with eternal delight at this little thing. So I don't think I could have done that, but she did. And it's something that as men, I can be very, very pleased that the better sex deals with, quite honestly, because they do it better than I think we ever could. And this brings us on to the themes of today's podcast, both how amazing women are and also the subject of bringing up kids and influencing them, because it's all weirdly prescient to what I talked to our today's guest about. And today's guest is a lady called Dr. Elizabeth Dobson. Now, Liz Dobson has become known to me through an organisation called the Yorkshire Sound Women Network, which, although it may sound like it, just really sound women in Yorkshire. Well, that's true. It actually is an organisation of really sound women, but also sound women, as in women who work in sound. Now, you may not have heard of Dr. Elizabeth Dobson, but she is a luminary in her field and a fascinating and interesting person to talk to, especially about this idea of creativity and inspiration and how we learn, how we best inspire and teach other people, especially young people, obviously, how to get into music and recording. She is a National Teaching Fellow of the HEA and a Principal Enterprise Fellow in Music Technology at the University of Huddersfield. This is where she teaches modules in sonic arts, sound for media, film music composition. She co-founded 2 knowledge-sharing projects, Collab Hub and, what we'll talk about today, the Yorkshire Sound Women Network, and maintains an ongoing commitment to new interdisciplinary research on inclusive music technology education. And if you've attended any of the synthesizer meetups in the United Kingdom, you will probably have noticed a slight skew in gender. It would be fair to say that there is a vast and great disparity between the amount of men and the amount of women at these events. And that's an indicator of something that is a lot harder to see online, but is still present, which is there just are not very many women in the music technology, audio recording industry. To an incredibly weird extent. Now, there's an enormous amount to say about this subject. And when you have conversations like this with people, you encounter lots and lots of different opinions. Lots of people have different beliefs on why they think that is. And there are many, many different theories. What I would like you to try and bear in mind is to discount any idea that music technology, although it has technology in the name, that technology is the important part of what we're doing. I don't think it is, because whilst, yes, there is a certain degree of nerdiness and like technical know-how required to operate synthesizers, the end result is sound exploration and music. Most of the time, depending on what your goals are with buying synths. I mean, it's okay. You don't have to make music with synths. You can just enjoy them as a meditative process. But sound exploration and music is not gendered. I really, really am going to have to disagree with you if you think that it is, because it's just not. There are plenty of people of different genders who make music. So it's not a boyish thing. But I think perhaps the root of one of the problems is that it can be considered boyish because of a lot of societal tropes that there are around technology and therefore who technology is pushed at. Namely, that technology is pushed at boys. And that comes from so many different places. They're basically like memes. There are these sort of tropes, these sort of attitudes that kind of float on the surface of the sea like foam and just there. And everyone kind of goes, oh, well, that's what we say about this sort of thing. That's what everyone says about that. So I'll say that as well. And I think about this, especially as a person who's now got a little fresh mind. I will have a huge role in influencing him as he grows older. And I will do that consciously, and inevitably I will do it subconsciously. More so subconsciously, because you just can't help it. Sometimes things happen and you are your own person, and they look to you for guidance and to see how to act in certain situations and to know what to say. So your kid will ape you in the most traditional and organic sense of that term, whether you like it or not. And the bottom line is, I go on my YouTube channel and I can see the gender split. I was looking at one of my recent videos and it tells me of the logged in users who have declared their gender, how many of them are male, how many of them are female. It is 100% male on the videos that I have made. And I don't think that that's right. I think there's something wrong. And it's either my video or it's how encouraging and welcoming we're making this space, because there's lots and lots to talk about and we'll get into it in the podcast. But let's just assume that music is not a boy thing and that playing with synthesizers, therefore, shouldn't just be for boys. It should be for everyone. I want everyone to share in this incredibly awesome, nerdy hobby that I have. And I hope that you think the same thing. And turning someone on to making electronic music is like giving them a gift for life. It's by far one of the best hobbies a person can hope for. So let's talk to Dr. Liz Dobson about creativity and inspiring people. Thanks. But that isn't exclusive while we're here as well. I think it's interesting just to understand your background and this facility as well, for those who don't know. And I'm very conscious that, despite the fact that we're talking about the Yorkshire Sound Women's Network, that it's not about, I don't want you to be here just to talk about being a woman in the industry. That's
I appreciate that.
Yes, that's literally what I don't want to do. There's so much other stuff to talk about. Yeah,
and it can become a sort of, a thing where
that's what
you are the minority, you become aware of it.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of minority you are, you become aware of it, and you're more likely to do some kind of advocacy work, or and then your identity becomes around that work rather than your own practice. And it's a double whammy, because your own practice also is set to one side whilst you're doing activism. You know. So it is really important to put the lens back on what women are doing in their practice as well.
So tell me about your background and work and this place. Like, what is your sort of route here and into the world of electronics and sound design, composition?
So many questions.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because my route to Huddersfield is a little bit sort of the end of the story in terms of my route into electronic music, which I think, you know, anybody who's naturally interested in sound in that sort of way was playing with technology when they were a kid, you know. And when I was a kid, that meant cassette players and recording sound from the piano and then recording another sound over the top of it.
Nice.
And sort of multi-tracking before really.
Did you have like
knowing what
multi-track recorders as a kid?
No, just cassette players. I had a cassette player with two tape cassettes, you know, and I'd record the family and I'd record my piano and try and make compositions that way. And I was always very conscious that we'd learn about music in school and then sound in physics. I could never understand why they were dealt with separately. Yeah. And for me, it's always been a sort of spectrum of interest across the whole area. So back then, of course, though, we're talking sort of early 80s, before MIDI, music in the home was, for me, a more sort of classical interest.
Well, there was electronic music, but I guess were your parents playing it, or
you
weren't aware of it? Like,
my dad had a record player. I remember him saying, "Whatever you do, don't touch this stylus here." You know, it's worth £50, which back then, I'm not sure what the equivalent is now, a hell of a lot of money.
But more than you'd want to replace.
Yeah. So I thought, there are grooves on my finger and there are grooves on the record player. You know, bearing in mind I was quite little at the time, I thought, I bet that makes an interesting sound. And I think that's always been my, you know, fascination with sound and music, so how things work. And so we had a kind of broad range of musics at home, but not really electronic or, nothing like what we're doing now.
You did play your finger?
Yeah, I did do it.
Yeah. How did it sound?
It just kind of sounded awful.
It's an amazing idea, though. I still don't really understand how the grooves on vinyl work, but it is magic to me. That's brilliant. Why do you think that you were... Can you try and place where that initial spark comes from to be... Because not all kids would necessarily make that connection or be bold enough to try it. So I suppose it's...
naughty enough.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose it's the curiosity of... And the kind of question is, how is a person set up to be interested in electronic music or to be susceptible to it, for want of a better term?
I suppose it comes down to what's in your environment and your surroundings and some aspect of your nature. I often think when I'm doing my research in creativity and learning, I often think about the importance of having access to certain kinds of equipment in order to learn. So when you get your hands on a cassette player and you can really manipulate it and listen, you're learning and you're processing and taking risks and making a mistake, breaking tape, whatever. And I think it's the same for me as I was growing up. I had access to a ZX Spectrum, so I could copy code into the computer. So I developed an understanding about that, which I didn't pick up until actually really recently. But if those things are not in your environment, you don't get the chance to explore them. Yeah. And I think that relationship of the two is really crucial.
But you were never pushed to do it. It was always something you found a natural curiosity to experiment. So you're messing around with tape or you're a kid who is happy to experiment. I suppose then how do you then come to the adult who takes this on as a profession and a discipline and all manner, everything?
Well, I did a very traditional classical sort of education. At school, we were learning string instruments, so I learned the violin. I was the third best in our friends group in terms of violin, so I learned the viola.
Nice, yeah.
I tuned my violin down to the sound of a viola. It sounded horrendous as a viola,
okay.
but then I ended up deciding I did want to study music at university, so I went to Bangor University, and they had an introduction to music technology, and I was naturally interested, and I took whatever music technology modules I could, and got a chance to work in the studio, and I wasn't very good at it. I spent a lot of time listening to the studio engineer, who was our tutor, telling me that my bass was too soft or too muddy or too something else. And he had these beautiful speakers which he'd made out of slate himself. What? It's a gorgeous studio that they have amazing studios because they overlook Snowdonia, and it's very nice space.
Oh my God.
So I volunteered just recording lunchtime recitals and going out and doing recording concerts, just getting as much experience as I could. And since then, I've worked in higher education, which means access to amazing facilities and studios and young, very inspiring people for a long time now.
Tell me a little bit again. Obviously, you've just shown me around this building. There's some quite incredible stuff, which obviously, and in part, we are surrounded. For those who can't see, we are literally being flanked by two EMS Synthias, which we're trying to dig some of the provenance of them. But as you said, they've been here since time immemorial. They've been here since they were new, probably, and they look new. They've
been kept well.
Yeah, they've been kept well. Some amazing equipment. I suppose I'd be really interested to know about. When I was a kid, I was particularly interested in animation and design, and I was watching Wallace and Gromit, and I just learned Jurassic Park, and was for me, it was special effects and kind of animation, which were the things that amazed me. And as a little kid, I was doing 8mm films, doing stop motion and clay animation as a little boy. But I didn't really have an electronic music sort of bug until I was I was a late bloomer to music, full stop, and was probably 15 or 16 when my brothers were playing me Aphex Twin and Orbital, and something about that music kind of caught my ear, and then it was combined with going to a gig to see Orbital play, actually at the Sheffield Octagon, of course, where they have synth. I now think of as the place of Synthfest, but it's interesting coming here because I ended up going to uni to do, as I was saying, do animation and that kind of stuff. But I sort of side-loaded myself into an electronic world by just audaciously buying equipment because of magazines, Future Music, and so it was really interesting walking around here and kind of, as I said to you, I was in a way, I wish I'd known about somewhere like this, to know that this was something that was an option for me. I could have potentially explored this kind of world and had access to things. But the irony is, at the time, I probably wouldn't have realised how good a thing it was, especially equipment like the Synthes and the System 100M, and I would not have realised those things were cool at the time. Do you know what I mean? So and I suppose my question is it's how do we inspire young people that electronic music is something that they can explore, and maybe they should all come to University of Huddersfield perhaps and explore it there.
I'm biased, obviously, in that respect. I mean, I've worked in several places, usually for 3 years. I arrived here in 2007, and the music department was in a different building, and I've stayed here ever since for very, very good reasons, and the facilities are second to none. They really are. There's nothing that you could imagine wanting that you wouldn't have access to. Does that make sense? So you used to have the electronic music studios in the old annex, and I think that's these VCS3 synths were there then, and they were there in 1987 when Michael Clark arrived. So I need to dig in to find out when they arrived, and they make this. If you really think back to the early sort of Doctor Who, Delia Derbyshire sound, you can really hear that here, and they're super haunting, beautiful synthesizers, and we get them out for workshops and taster days, and we get people to get hands-on with this equipment because they have such an interesting patching, different sort of patching system to other sorts of synths. But I think that there's so much that's available digitally. People may be tempted to think that they can achieve anything just digitally on their own laptop. But the benefit of coming into a space like this is that sense of play. And like I was saying before, that interaction with the technology can inspire so many other possibilities that you couldn't have imagined just working with it. You know, if you think about what you can accomplish just with the software, however, there are certain presets and you could be ending up with the same sound as everybody else almost by default. It's sort of writing the music for you. And when you change your environment and you expose yourself to other kinds of technologies, other kinds of things it can bring out of you, and you can bring out of it is a sort of conversation with the technology, and you're learning all the time you're doing that. So to be in a higher education environment that's well equipped is a gift to opening up new avenues, especially if it's an environment where you can get training on how to be an independent artist and how to be, if you like, a sole trader and start marketing yourself and understand it, that sort of independent practitioner industry and have a portfolio career. So sound design for film. We've had people go on as location recordists. We've got people who've gone on to work for companies like Ableton. Yeah. So there's that end. And then in computing and engineering, also the more under the bonnet of the mixing desk side of music technology and music production, and also studio production. It's really important for young people, but especially for parents, to understand that careers in the music industry range not just from studio production and composing for media and film and television and all of that, but also the people who are designing the interfaces and the hardware. It's ubiquitous. Sound is everywhere. So that means that there are many jobs. The creative industries are worth, I think, over 100 billion a year in this country. And that those industries include phenomenal range of jobs, including sound and audio. And when you think about it in those terms, it's an incredibly prolific range of career options there. The health industry as well. I mean, if you can inspire people to study music technology in terms of signal processing and machine listening and feed into those sorts of health and engineering and science industries. But the nice thing about music technology is it has that element of play and musical expressiveness. So you can really, you could say, instead of thinking about it in terms of STEM, we talk about STEAM now, so STEM with an A in the middle representing the arts.
Nice.
And we had a project a few weeks ago where we had, I think it was 11 to 13-year-old girls, and they were working with Eleanor Cully and Ryoko Akama, and they were working on little motors. They were soldering motors, some of them for the first time, and transducers. And they made a sound installation where the motors were striking objects and they were listening to the sound, and transducers were playing into objects, and they could choose what the objects were. So that in some case it was the teddy bear or a CD case, which was very clever, I thought, or a balloon. And they created this sort of magical space. So it really encapsulates this sense that it's about experimentation and play and science, and seeing the connections between all of those things and creative arts.
So these could be people who may not end up going into the sound world, but using it as a way of inspiring them, basically. Yeah. You also have done soldering workshops as well. I know that Nina and Zoe have come, and is that right? Those done here as is that part of the university or the Yorkshire Sound Women's Network, or?
I should probably explain all of that then. I'll go back another step before that. So out of my PhD, I was really interested in creating situations where people can take risks and play and learn through collaboration. And I had this sort of model, this idea that if you create the right circumstances, that people become more relaxed, take more risk, and risk is required for learning, then they will interact, talk being the sort of, as Vygotsky would say, the tool for high mental development in terms of young children. But if you think about trying to explain one of these synthesizers, you almost feel your brain working, as you're trying to articulate something. So getting students to talk to each other is super important from that point of view.
And the best way the best way to learn is to teach, isn't it? What they say?
That's what they say. So if you create a situation where people have more agency themselves away from the formal assessment of the curriculum, you create an environment where people become more enterprising and they can start their own initiatives, like a sounds pit. So we did this for a while, and then I thought, well, as many do, the audio industries are very male dominant, and we have overwhelming statistics that support that. And I could talk about that, but I could point you to some books as well.
Well, yeah. Isn't it something like 5%? Is it 5% women or women are non-binary versus?
I think
male?
the around 5% of the Audio Engineering Society members are women. The Women's Audio Mission website say 5%.
Yeah.
The recent Annenberg report has a lot of interesting statistics that actually show that behind the desk studio producers, I think, is 2% for their particular report. It's a really good report, but also in terms of applications to university courses, Georgie Bourne and Carl Devine produced a report based on UCAS applications from A-level music technology to music tech degrees. It was based on 10 years of applications during a time where applications were increasing by 1,400%. If you think about that, that's an insane increase in applications, 90% of them male. So, and also you've got all the female pressure statistics about festivals as well, and it's an overwhelming landscape. So I was thinking that very naively, really, if we could bring some people together and start creating these more comfortable environments where the risk is associated with being different from everybody else in the room. In this case, being the only woman in a culture that associates masculinity and technology, that there may be some benefit to bringing people together. And so the Yorkshire Sound Women Network was started with a group of 16 people came to the first meeting in Huddersfield in 2015. And together we worked on developing the organisation, and eventually it became a community interest company, and the relationship with the university is strong, and the university has given the organisation a lot of support. But what that has enabled is that we've been able to employ somebody in order to do fundraising and then get successful youth music grants in, and leading to, under the funding streams in as well, but leading to two new music tech clubs for girls, one in Doncaster and one with Leeds Beckett. A tour of 20 schools around Yorkshire where the arts leader is talking about music technology, and it's a very practical workshop, but presenting key iconic people as well.
Oh, nice.
And we've had a series of workshops continually through that time by regional groups who take autonomy themselves to deliver workshops. We were able to do a quick survey of recording studios in the Yorkshire area and get a sense of the statistics there, and do an advocacy film and a pamphlet. And it's very upbeat. It really just shows what the landscape looks at and what we could be doing to support diversity.
What form were you talking about the going to schools and doing workshops? Like, what form do they take to inspire kids who may not have even considered this?
We've done a whole range of different things. So those are delivered by Pam Hume, who's amazing. She does work with organ and electronics and live electronics. And in this context, what she's doing is, I believe it's to do with pedal loops. And I haven't seen the workshop because actually now we have a team. I fortunately I don't have to be involved in all aspects of it. The workshops I've been mostly involved with have been the Go Compose workshops, so I can talk about those. They are a partnership with Sound and Music, which is a national organisation, and they applied for funding from Youth Music, which meant that they could fund for us 20 workshops for girls. And so I had to think about this question of how do you develop these workshops for girls? And I was really inspired by what Nina and Zoe did that you mentioned earlier. So they designed their own printed circuit board. Nina developed it and created these beautiful packs where all the components were in the packs. All the printouts had all the instructions, just like a jigsaw puzzle. And she made these videos that show how to solder a joint. And we worked on these workshops, and Zoe delivered some workshops on synthesis pioneers as well, who are women. And so I was just sort of in the background supporting them, and they really did everything, and they did an amazing job, because what we found, and there's a beautiful video of this on our website.
Yeah, I've seen that video. It's great.
It's when one of the girls said, "With this, we could change the world." I'm like, yes, this is what we want you to understand, is what's happening behind, and their growth in confidence and the power that they realise they have to be more in control. It's just lovely. It's really inspiring. But with those workshops, it made me realise what is possible, because we took a lot of risks, because we had young people soldering.
What could possibly go wrong?
And amazingly, it went really, really well. And I've taken that workshop and delivered it at Bradford Girls Grammar, and that's gone well as well, as far as I'm aware.
No burnings.
And Lola York has taken the idea and developed her own practice out of that as well, and that's really nice. But with the Go Compose, what I wanted to do was create a series of workshops that would expose them to a wide range of types of music technology. So this year's sequence started with DJing. So we managed, as part of the funding, to get some CDJs and get Angel Lee in to run a workshop there and get their confidence up on working with other people's music. And then Caro C came and delivered a sort of Delia Derbyshire radiophonic workshop inspired practice, where she's using lots of found objects that she brings, including a sort of Delia Derbyshire
lampshade, trademark lampshade,
yes, exactly. She's got one like it.
Nice.
She gets them really exploring with those materials and recording to GarageBand and thinking about sound in that sort of way.
Does she have like lots of systems, or is this something that you can do with just a few, like, or one computer and just crowd everyone around? It's from the practicality of, like, I think about those things and how much resources are actually required to...
That's a really good question. She uses iPads, so they're either working in pairs with headphone splitters, or they're working individually. And I think the conversation's really nice, because of what I said before. It's really important that they're talking and negotiating and listening and evaluating. Another workshop that was delivered last year, actually, I've got a pile of H4n audio recorders, and that I kind of call it sound harvesting. Jess Aslan had them in groups of 3, just going out and listening to sounds and recording what they thought would make a good kick, or what would make it, so they could reconstruct a sort of track. And then she had a different game for them, but using the same format, where they were going to record sounds and then play them back later and get other people to guess what they were. So it's a little bit more abstract than the first game.
That is a good game. Like, record a sound, manipulate or slow it down, speed it up. Can you tell what it still is? Can you still tell what it is?
And it really drew them into that world of sound, and the technology was sort of a by the by thing. And when you're working with young people like that, some of them are very shy of using the technology and will willfully refuse to touch it for whatever reason. And I'm interested in what gets them from that point to actually being confident and being able to use it and take risks.
That sense of agency, like, you're allowed to do this. That's I can speak only for, like, design of being involved in some of the world of, like, the designing and building of electronic music equipment. Like, as a case in point, there's literally a Moog Voyager in the corner. You can see that Moog's recent synthesizers, like the grandmother and matriarch, which have coloured panels. So they're no longer, well, not exclusively, but in these instruments are using coloured panels, which a lot of people are like, oh, you made them look toy-like. And they're like, that is exactly why they've done it. It's like, it's meant to be played with like a toy. And it's interesting to see. I don't know if there are other people that, like you have the chord little bits.
I was just
and
thinking
stuff.
about those,
which are things that are sort of, they are toys, but they're not toys at all. They're sort of
like
toy
gateways.
They're gateways. They're like sneaky toys. They're designed to...
Oh, by the way, you're doing FM synthesis now. That was like couple of steps. Amazing. I think they're a brilliant, absolutely genius invention to have that hands-on playfulness with it. And it's the same with the Makey Makey. Do you know about the Makey?
No, I've never
So
seen it.
It's a circuit board where you basically connect it to your computer via USB, and then you have a PCB which you can connect outputs through to like a series of bananas.
Yeah, literally
or whatever.
bananas.
Literal
Not banana jacks, bananas.
Actual bananas.
Yes.
And you can just set up the computer so it's playing, if you hit E on the computer, it will play a sound in Logic. So it takes like 5 minutes to set it up.
So you're using bananas, but then so you're touching the fruit and it causes reactions, or it's just,
I guess it's just an on-off signal on a particular key on the keyboard, and then however you've set up the keyboard to play whatever software. So it might be set up to play a computer game up, down, and so on.
I see. And it could just control anything.
That's it. So if you put in some music software, I think I did it a couple of years ago where I just had some flowers in vases and I was playing the flowers, and it's this playfulness which really which is really interesting. And actually Vicky Clark did a workshop for the Go Compose where she was working with sound and light, and she did something a little bit like this, where she had the students drawing a lot of graphite onto paper in order to take a conducted signal and play a sound. And so one of the girls who was slightly older realised, I could clip this to my ear and touch you, and this is going to still play the sound. She was off. She was really experimenting then. I see, this is what it's for. This is the really motivating.
Yeah. Because if you're asking, or if you're pushing these kinds of buttons and boundaries today, what can you do tomorrow?
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask literally recommendations for like things to inspire children, I suppose. That's like, because I've got a child on the way, and it's like, I think I was having a conversation with someone who said, kind of ironically, but they were possibly being slightly serious, and I think it's probably, I can see why this would make sense, but they were like, to inspire, if you want to inspire your kid to take up electronic music, don't let them have a go on your synths. Tell them they are not allowed to touch the synths.
Well, that's me and the record player, isn't it? Yeah, do not, whatever you do, don't touch that. It's a Darren Brown. Don't press the red button.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd like to think he knew exactly what he was doing and was like, this is what I can get Liz to, I can turn Liz into a
I can assure you,
sound pioneer.
Judging by his response, I don't think that's what,
But I suppose then, and this is it. It's like, and this person said, like, just say no, don't let them touch the thing, and then obviously one day you do let them have a taste of it. But and I think about that, like, I don't want to be an insufferable bore to my children, but I know that I want them to be inspired, And I was lucky to have brothers, and I think having those kind of role models where they are, they're older than you, and I don't know what I'd necessarily respect my brothers at that age. Do you know what I mean? Like, where it's like, I didn't put them on a pedestal and treat their recommendations as kind of gospel, but I certainly did listen to the music that they provided me, and it was my own choice what I latched onto. But so I suppose it is the question of like, what can we give our children? How do we best inspire young people? Obviously, you've written thesis, this is your like special subject, but I know there's no one size fits all.
I think, in terms of my research, that's all about collaborative learning and creativity and understanding how creativity is not situated in terms of the individual. This idea of the lone genius is quite a sort of old notion that we can exist in that sort of way, and that really creativity is distributed, whether it's between us and then the natural discourse that we're having and where that leads, or the performance of a jazz band, where a jazz group that has a history of multiple conversations, if you like, but ultimately exposure to equipment, exposure to listening, to conversations, a chance to talk and space to play, I think is important. So to definitely get hands-on and try things. But I think it was Keith Swanwick's spiral of development in relationship with music really is a nice place to look for more information on this.
So what is that?
Keith Swanwick did some really interesting research on musical development of young people as they're getting older, and the spiral is a really nice illustration of how very young children through to young adults relate to sound in a progressively different way. So very young children will experience the vibration, the sensation, and they're experiencing sound as they experience everything. It's tactile, and so to have a guitar close by and just to experiment with the sound is really important.
You feel it as much as you hear it.
Yeah. And there aren't any. There's no real social conditioning there, and there isn't the dexterity to try or even have an interest in trying to emulate certain things. But there comes a point where emulation starts to happen, and then when we get to teenage, identity becomes difficult to separate from music, and I saw this with the girls coming for the Go Compose as well. They're trying to assert their identity through their practice as well, and if you're bringing them something very avant-garde, it's like, what is this? And even if they've grown up with it, they may push against it and want to conform because their identity and who they want to present to the world is changing so radically at that point, and they may find that they only develop a recurrent interest in those early experiences much later, more like 18, 19 or so. It was really interesting here to have students producing music which had a very strong 80s sound to it. There was a kind of 80s resurgence a couple of years ago.
But you're talking, this is from kids who are not really children of the 80s.
No, but I think their parents were.
Yeah, okay.
And so they've grown up with this sound in the background, and somehow it sort of is in their DNA.
I don't know what way we're influencing our kids to try and make them, live like we did back in the day, but certainly I know that I would be playing the music of my youth to my kids incessantly, and desperately hoping that they would enjoy it.
I listened to a really interesting podcast. Sorry, just a podcast about a guy who really wanted his daughter to be a great rapper. So
just full stop.
He was really into certain kinds of music. He was really into certain kinds of music, and he wanted to share that with her so passionately, and he wanted her to pick it up. But she loved it, and he found out she was a great rapper because she learnt all the words, and she just could do it all brilliantly. And she was ahead of her years in that respect. But then she became a teenager, and she started dissing his interests, and she had more contemporary interests. But it didn't mean that they go anywhere. But she didn't want to disappoint him either. I think it was either This American Life or Radio Lab or something like that. But
it's interesting what you said about, so then young children respond to music in a sensory, like in terms of vibration. I was amazed the other day. We were sitting with my friend's little girl, and I had the rattle and was just like doing like a constant shh, 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 shh. And she just starts to like rock forward and back, like. And I was like, is that because you've seen your parents doing that, or you? I didn't know. I'm going to be very much looking out for that in my own kid. It's like how much of our love for music is hardwired and how much is learned. Would they invent music on their own, given enough agency?
I wish I knew. I don't know. From my point of view, all I could say, I mean, even in the womb, and after a certain point, a child can hear sound. Yeah. So, if you're a cellist, you play the cello. If you want, if it's calming for a baby, it must be calming for a baby that's not yet born. Yeah. So, I think it's important to just have things available so they can explore on their own terms, and as long as it's safe and child appropriate.
Yes, indeed.
But I wouldn't be shy of playing. Again, age appropriate but complex sound to a young person at all, because they take different things from it, and often very surprising things as well. And I don't think anything should be saved for older or more sophisticated ears, or it's.
I'm sure I can't remember where I read this, but someone was talking about playing classical music to young people, and saying how everyone always thinks that the music that young people respond to is going to be the fastest, most impressive. But actually there's a tremendous capability and interest in young people to listen to the more relaxing and sort of slower and more kind of ambient pieces. Like, they almost go over better. I think it's interesting, the idea of not imposing your own judgment on just, being open and letting people try everything so that they can make their own decisions, not being too prescriptive.
Just going back to that, the reason that I mentioned that podcast is I remember now, he said he didn't want to be listening to kiddies' tunes all the time. He wanted his kids to be into his tunes.
Yeah. Right.
Because he was going to have to listen to them all the time.
It's like, I'm not doing wheels on the bus.
Exactly, like, so why not?
Yeah. Obviously, we're talking about inspiring young people. And it's also, that's the other thing, and we're talking about with women in this industry, inspiring women. But also, it's like, then it leads us on to this question of how are we restricting women without realising it? Because that's the other thing that I'm thinking, like, I don't know what gender my child is. And it doesn't matter what gender my child is. It's absolutely, I'm just happy to have a child who's healthy. But my brothers have kids and lots of our friends do. And I'm sort of, we're having those discussions at home about, like, what will we say and do without realising it that will compartmentalise the interests of our children and make judgments on or decisions on their behalf on what they're supposed to be playing with. And you get friends who say, try what despite all my efforts, she loves this doll. She loves dolls and pink. I didn't put that on her, and I'm like, did you or did you not? And it's an enormous and impossible thing. But I suppose then the question, from where we are here, is talking about music and this industry where there's just not enough women, and it's clear that despite our best efforts, it's not been a welcoming place. Because I think, to state for the record, that thing that people, the common thing that people, if I brought this subject up and they say, well, the reason that there aren't any women, they're all perfectly welcome, but it's just a slightly boyish thing. All this technology, all this gear is just boyish, isn't it? And my answer to that is all of this gear is for the making of music. And don't tell me for a second that there is anything inherently boyish about music. That doesn't make any sense at all. Right. So I suppose then it's, how do you think that we are making it hard for girls, and what can we do to not do that anymore, or do it less?
I think you're right to take it back to social conditioning in childhood. I think that it's important to recognise that there are very significant social conditioning contexts that influence parents, school, children, peer groups to have certain role models and behave in certain ways. Now, I'm no expert on gender in terms of nature nurture, but I am conscious of research that shows, so Victoria Armstrong's research and also David Hargreaves and Anna Colley, research that shows that when girls in the 80s were getting involved in music technology at school, there was a correlation between dropout and fall away from music technology and self-confidence. Right. And that around that time, there were more boys involved in gaming and using the computer at home, and more comfortable using the computer in the music technology.
Yes.
Of course, music technology was introduced to encourage boys into doing music, because there weren't enough boys doing music. It was predominantly a women's sort of girls' subject. When you dig into musical instruments, some musical instruments are gendered, so we associate historically certain instruments with one gender or another. So
yes, of course.
It's a really big subject, this idea of gender and music, and then you've got technology and masculinity and industry as well, and trying to press against all of those things is quite difficult. If there are fewer girls then coming through the system, then you have what we call this leaky pipeline of girls who have a sort of spotlight shining on them if they're the only girl or the only woman in a space. Because then what happens is a feeling of needing to dispel those myths and being responsible for that, and not being permitted to make the same mistakes that all average people may, on the same playing field, should be able to make. So I see there sort of two extremes. You're held to a potentially, you maybe feel to be held to a potentially higher standard or higher expectation because you are representing, and this doesn't work only in terms of gender, of course. You think about it intersectionally, we need to think about race, and ability, sexuality, and when you're different, then there might be a feeling that you represent.
You represent all people.
Yeah, and that's a lot of pressure, especially if you feel like there's a greater lens on you. And on the other side, the pressure is to not prove somebody's assumption that you're going to make a mistake. So not to sort of prove the opposite. So it's like a flip switch. Rather than being able to just sit in the middle and be fine.
You can do no right, basically. Yeah.
Right. So it is helpful to have environments where you can just relax and not have to worry about that, which is why same group environments are helpful, because they're not completely safe environments. They're still complicated spaces, but some of those anxieties can be just put to one side, where you get involved in the kit and make a loud feedback noise, or ask a question that you would feel a bit too exposed to ask in an all-male environment. So it takes a while, and if you've had, let's say you've had some negative experiences, some explicitly sexist or marginalising experiences, of which we have many documented, that can make you accumulatively more resistant to exposing yourself to it happening again. So you might see someone come into your space who might actually appear a little bit brittle or a bit shy or a bit like I have to be very careful, because I also don't represent all views about all women, or women's experiences of those spaces. But it's worth bearing in mind that they may well have had other experiences and would like to be assumed to know, not assuming that they require a certain degree of advice or additional support. Just assume that they know and make sure that the systems are very transparent for everybody, so it's a level playing field, so that the equipment available, for example, there's no myth around what that is, or there's no hidden list, or you don't have to seek special permission, that there's a very clear list of what the equipment is, how to book it out, how to access it, so no one feels like there's a kind of power relationship where you have to beg, borrow and steal, or you have to be buddies with a certain person to get something. So the way that the systems work, if the systems are really transparent and fair for everybody, it just evens a playing field for the people who may feel a bit more exposed or a bit more vulnerable in other ways. But also studio environments. Grace Banks produced a really lovely article in The Quietus about this, how studio environments can be welcoming or more hostile, and you may not notice that if you might have some picture of somebody on the wall who is known for some kind of misconduct, but you're not aware of it, or you don't really give much thought to it. That could be hugely triggering for someone else in that space. So being aware of that, but also pushing even further in the other direction, making sure that it's not just white men that are on the walls, making sure that there's full diversity in that space, and talking to more diverse people about how to make that space welcoming for all people as well. Like talking to organisations like the Women's Audio Mission and asking how they operate and how they make an inclusive environment.
Yeah, the onus is on people who are setting up and run those kinds of environments to be mindful of the way that they can come across. I suppose that leads on, it is that kind of question. It'd be good to just talk straight on. For the people who don't think there's a problem, can you talk to them, just talk a bit about that, and it's... and with no sense of judgment as well, because it isn't helpful to, people can't help their programming in a sense, which is maybe a bit of a judgmental way of me putting it, but just to say we are, we're all the products of our upbringing and every experience that's ever happened to us. So it's hard for people, but I can speak for myself, and I will speak only for myself, that if I'm hearing that, a person or a group or a minority, of anyone, of any kind, if they're saying there is a problem, and I'm not comfortable with this, then as I take the view that as a person who is not a member of that group, then it is not my place to say whether the other people are right or wrong about it, and it's no skin off my teeth to try and understand or listen and be more welcoming. If the person is saying that the environment is not that welcoming, then it would be rude to discount it, and it would be the onus is on me to just listen and treat it as if it is really a thing. It's that thing of believe women. And so I suppose the question is just, what do you say to those people who say there isn't really a problem, or it's like two things: there isn't really a problem, and the little things don't really matter?
It's I suppose just to handle the second one first, the little things are incremental. It's like water wearing away a cliff.
Yeah.
Eventually it all collapses. If you expect people to tolerate a certain amount of constant pressure because of their identity, eventually they'll just step away and they'll give up. And considering what we were saying before about the size of the industry, what a waste that is for that industry, but that means that the economic privilege is coming back to the same people, and that's where this begins. For centuries, economic privilege has been with primarily white men, and that means that if you're not disadvantaged, it may be more difficult to see and experience those things. And so I used a sort of flip scenario of stay-at-home dads to try and help to explain how that feels. So if you can imagine going to an all-mums group and you're the stay-at-home dad, and people are assuming you don't know how to operate with your child, you don't know how to look after your child, you don't know what that child needs. And it's not that people are saying that to you directly, but they might be benevolently trying to take it off you or suggest certain things. And I think it's a nice flip way of saying you need to empathise with what's happening, but also I wonder how many women have to say this not only as a problem, but it's a kind of violence against women. And how many people have to say that before it's
before
believed?
You agree that there's a problem?
Is there a number? Are there like, do there have to be 4 million people before that one person thinks, okay, maybe, if it was the other way around, maybe it would be differently. Maybe it just take one person to say there's a problem. I don't know. But to have so many stories of sexual violence against women, discrimination. I've been on the wrong end of violence as well in relation to this topic. Even just speaking up about marginalised people makes you vulnerable. So you have to become more resilient, which means that you have to spend time on this as well, rather than making your work.
Just doing stuff.
There's a huge amount to celebrate about women's organisations and women's groups from my point of view, and those groups sometimes are set up to focus inwardly, and some would criticise them to be sort of echo chambers, but I think that they are resource-giving communities where people can come back out again and step back out as a minority and say, okay, these are my resources. We're not taking anything away from you. We're fundraising and we're doing more for addressing this balance where there's enough. There's like an enormous weight on one side of the scales of centuries of privilege, and the other side are really trying to push against it. So we have all women events to try and push against that immense weight to get even a little bit of momentum there. Yeah,
that's the idea. Yeah, that what women are looking for is equality, not to take over.
It's
literally
on the whole. I think what we want to see is a chance to, on the whole, what women want is a chance for girls and women to have just the same opportunities without walking into a studio and somebody saying, maybe ignoring you or assuming that you don't know anything and you need everything teaching to you when you've been maybe teaching it for 20 years. These are incrementally frustrating, all the way through to people being molested or verbally abused online. I've heard and seen some horrendous things directed at women. Why should anybody tolerate that? Just because it's considered to be a male domain. I've been into studio environments and felt incredibly uncomfortable in that space, and I think the argument, sometimes the counter-argument is, well, why shouldn't the lads have a space that's just for them? But this is a professional space. Yeah. So this is a different... It's an environment where,
It's like...
and that comes around to a sense of entitlement.
Yes, When I've brought up this subject and I've had a person say that, this whole thing is kind of politicizing what was supposed to be my sort of, this is my little sanctuary to talk about synths. It's like, how selfish to have that sanctuary all to yourself.
That is the definition of privilege, really, to be able to do your practice without having to think about any of these issues.
Yeah.
That is a privilege.
And that's all that women are asking for as well, is just to be able to do the same thing you do.
Or not to have to think about race.
Not
to have to wonder if you're going into a job interview, whether the person interviewing you is racist.
Yeah.
For that to not even cross your mind is a privilege.
Yeah.
And
I think if the people saying that there's no problem could just spend just one day in the other person's shoes, then they would perhaps see all the millions of, as you say, like even just having to think about, is it safe for me to be in a place, or it's safe to walk home this way?
Absolutely.
Those kinds of things which, the person saying there's no problem just has never even occurred to them is even a thing that other people experience every single day. It's like worrying about climate change. It's like, what could possibly be wrong with just making the world a place with cleaner air? It's like, what possible skin off your teeth what skin off your teeth to make it a more welcoming space? And if it's it's sort of my speaking entirely for myself. I'm like, if there are some events which are for women and non-binary, or non-white people, where it's a space just for these people to just not worry about anything and just enjoy the thing that I enjoy doing. It's like, what possible skin off my teeth? And is the existence of this activity group for this person going to somehow reduce the amount of availability for me to make electronic music or do what I like? Or it's like, no.
We do have people ask sometimes, do you do events for boys? And I can't work out, are they actually asking, or are they asking to make a point? So I usually point them towards other events which are in the public domain and point out that you probably find that they are all boys. That's the thing. Unless you advertise something specifically for girls or specifically for women, it probably is going to be all boys.
Absolutely.
And how do you make that change if that's the case? I was talking to Erin Barra 2 or 3 years ago, and she had a nice way of putting it. It's not like it's cake and, we're taking away from your half. That's not the way that it works. There's enough for everybody. And these organisations that are like Both Sides Now, the Leeds Music Group and the Yorkshire Sound Women Network, these are all organisations that are fundraising specifically to do that work, making those spaces. And so, for example, with the Go Compose, we managed to bring 50 girls in over the 2 years, most of them this year, who have never had any music technology experience and they've said they don't get that particular kind of experience at school either. So, where would they get it? Well, we're putting a lot of work, extra time and extra work into it. We make our own decisions to do that. So we wouldn't be doing it otherwise, is what I'm saying. It's not taking away from somebody.
It's just making more cake so that some other people can have some cake as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a bit afraid of asking this question because it's just perhaps over reducing and simplifying things. But what can anyone do to help, basically? No matter what gender or side you're on. They're not sides here, but just like, what can people do to help? Be it, and I suppose there's many layers. It's from the way that you phrase, conduct things, being mindful about the way that events are organised. And I mean, this is why it's a ridiculous question, because there's so many parts to it, such as I know that if you're invited to speak, I get inspired to speak at events, and something that's been pointed out to me, which is something I would not have thought about. Hand up, I would just never have occurred to me, is don't go and speak to events where you can see there's no diversity in the speakers. It's all just blokes, and it's and I wouldn't have thought to have done that, and it's really helpful to have had that pointed out because of course it is wrong, and it's just like, yes, okay, right, yes, okay. To be mindful of those things, and I suppose it's, all the way from that to when you go on a forum, don't say "Hey guys," and and don't, it's those little things which people I know people say those are small things. I guess it's going to be a very general question, but what can we do both broadly and also specifically to help these organisations?
I think I probably need to take a minute to make a list of what it is. Google the hashtag Audio Equity Pledge.
Yes.
Because that has quite a few things in there, ranging from environment and so on. Checking who else is on the panel and making a stand. It's a very powerful thing when somebody who isn't a woman makes that stand on behalf of women. That's incredibly powerful and helpful because it means that the general consensus is this is not okay. So in terms of diversity, that's really important. Same with festivals, same with language and environments, just thinking about that and seeking advice as well on how to look at something or get a consultant in if necessary. And then approaching organisations like the Yorkshire Sound Women Network saying, I have a platform, or I have some resources, or I have a little bit of admin time. Would you like some support on the kind of backstage side of the organisation? Can we work together on something? So collaborating. Instead of setting up a new initiative to benefit a particular demographic, seek out and build collaborative relationships with that demographic so that you know that what you're developing is supportive of that group and their interest and it comes from them. Make sure that it's not a platform for selling yourself. So it can be the case where an industry provider might say, we'd like you to use our equipment because you're working with girls and we want people to see girls using the equipment. So be very mindful about who is being centred and who is genuinely benefiting, because there is a tendency maybe for capitalism to happen, to look at the way that a job advert is presented or when it's possible for people to come to an interview, or making sure that there's childcare facilities is more evening, more levelling. So looking at the systemic barriers that women are facing in terms of the sort of day-to-day getting of work and progression. The music industry has this kind of informality to it. So looking at spaces where that can slip into something less, more casual, and making sure that professional conduct is there. So making safer spaces policies, anti-harassment. But importantly, as with the Access Space, there's an Access Space in Sheffield, have a wonderful document that explains how to make a safer space. And one of the points in there is about you can have a safer spaces policy, but you need to have someone who's going to actually implement it. Otherwise it's meaningless. You need the confidence. So there's that. There are probably several other things, and I encourage people to share what those are and to be receptive. And I think that the other side to that is when approaching an organisation that's supporting women and looking for a woman to deliver an event, be mindful that that woman needs paying as well. It's a good cause, but that doesn't mean that women should be giving up their free time.
The burden of it's put on them.
So when people approach the Yorkshire Sound Women Network, we have a pool of artists and project managers and so on, and we come back and say, well, this is the recommended fee that we suggest, so we can recommend some people, but not for free. So I hopefully we're beyond that now, but just very occasionally that does happen as well. So making women accountable for this is not acceptable anymore. Everybody has to be accountable for diversity and to look at the systemic issues that hold people back. And to do that work, to seek out artists and to seek people out rather than just take the easiest path because it's...
Or ask them to seek it out for you.
Right,
Cool. Good. Is there anything else?
I don't think so.
Actually, we should talk very quickly about your Euroact system as well. You've got... is this 120 Did you say it was 120?
I think it's 120. It's a while since I got it.
It's like a really weird width. It's like, I say weird just because there's like these kind of, like normally it's like, what is it, 104, well, we say it was 104 because that's like the airline. You said you had to check this into the hold, which is just like, I can't. Super fearful.
Well, maybe that's a newbie sort of error. I got into my journey into this has been through working with the Yorkshire Sound Women Network. I've learned so much about music technology. I didn't anticipate that. I hoped I would, but I didn't anticipate that. And through meeting Nina and Zoe and seeing soldering the PCB, and then seeing that I could go away and solder other things, and also simultaneously thinking maybe I should investigate getting my own system together. I started building this, and I had a particular compositional output in mind as well. What I wanted to do was control the synth from my acoustic violin, and I'm thrilled to say I've actually managed to do it.
So, nice.
With some help from a number of colleagues here, especially Owen Green at the university. He was brilliant. But because I'm no Max expert, and I think it's important to just try, and you learn when you've got a project, you actually start learning. You
need an objective. Can you talk a bit about how did you achieve it? Are there any sort of like particularly good things about the implementation, like how you managed to do it?
The key part of this was a module called Control, or CTRL, from Delta Labs. Ricky Graham heard what I wanted to do, and he was very generous, and they sent me one to experiment, and there's a blog post about that. So the Control, it has a USB out. On the left-hand side, you've got gates. And on the right-hand side, continuous CV. In the software, they sent me some Max objects, one called Helmholtz, a pitch tracker. And so the software is set up to send the gate or the frequency through. What I then did was ask Max to send an output to each of the CV outputs depending on which frequency I was playing. So I could have it so that the same frequency was going to 4 outputs, or if I play a particularly high note, it splits it out. So note played on the G or the D string, so just below or 40 hertz, anything there would only come out of one of the CV. That's anything really cool. On the A string, another CV, and anything on the E string, another one, which means that you can send those sounds to different oscillators, and you can tune those however you like separately, but let's say they're all to the same frequency but several high octaves higher. You can create some really beautiful clusters and really play with that. So
I love the idea that it's not going to be playing like a synthesized version of what you're playing. It's almost just doing something complete. You're almost using the violin as a completely unrelated input device.
That's it.
It's really bonkers.
But it was very special. When that first moment when I played and it actually played the same frequency back to me. I mean, it's an oscillator. It's a sine wave or whatever wave I choose that's playing back to me. But it was a very special moment to have it speak back, almost like it had come alive, because I was so used to playing on a keyboard or electronic controller. My violin is my violin. It was just a pickup that I used. So
it's cool. Since I've been chatting to a couple of people where it's talking about the hybridization of acoustic and electronics. It's really and then more. I think they're actually on two fronts. Like one of these people was like using a MIDI bass guitar, and then there's lots of interesting kind of control possibilities where you've got using, like, if you hammer certain frets, it will change the program on the synth and stuff. But then and then another one where he's talking about just layering, like naturally just acoustically layering sounds of the sounds of a violin with the sound of a synth doing something similar or related, so you get that kind of the collage of the two things. But then I think what you're doing is really interesting, where it's not even you're using almost the violin as a triggering instrument, but based on the sound. I think there's a lot of scope for using a modular synth, like having a modular synth kind of listen to what you're doing but almost improvise its own
it's nice because then I've got clouds on there, so I can put it through clouds and explore the sound. There's lots of possibilities, but it was built with this idea, and that comes back to this idea of composition and creativity being something that happens in relationship with the technology, because this happened as a the building of the synth happened after the idea for the composition, and then the composition changes as a result of learning more about what those capacities are. And I think we all know that sort of experience. But
I think everyone's built their Eurorack modular to do something, and then been like, actually, hang on, like I could do this as well.
And I've got the stepper acid on there as well, which is Nina and Zoe's brilliant stepper acid. Now I know they've got a new one out as well, which is
stepper drum.
Exactly, which sounds just mental. The polyphony that they've got on that, and the programming capacities sounds brilliant. Yeah,
it's really. I was having a quick go on the stepper drum at an event in Leeds, and it's for that it will be really nice. Just in the same way that with stepper acid, you can kind of almost just sort of do a gestural thing and just have it just listen to what you did. But stepper drum even more so, you can just, being able to like just bring stuff in very quickly. And then there was one thing I was thinking it'd be really nice to be, you could almost just dab notes and it's like live record all the time. And then it'd be nice to have the opposite, so you can just kind of dab and erase, so without, almost with your eyes closed, you could just kind of put in whole sort of sections of drums and percussion and then remove them as well. I'm a big fan of anything where it's like the least amount of button pushes to get the most amount of music is fine by me. That's the objective.
One of the things I find hard is being able to hear and do at the same time. I find that as soon as you start looking and doing, somehow your hearing sort of diminishes. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It's exaggerated when performing live as well. I lose all sense of perspective in relation to what, is this any good? Is anybody into this? Yeah. Or I think I saw a YouTube video of yours about this, which is really interesting.
That's something I'm wrestling with. It's like the time dilation effect of when you're performing. Your sense of time is completely messed up. I saw someone left a comment on one of my things. It was brilliant. It was like, I had my set and I've designed it for this amount of time, and I went and performed, and it was supposed to last like however many 30 minutes, and it lasted like 12. And I just, and for me, I thought I was on the money. That was 30 minutes. I'd done everything I needed to do, and it shows how as a human being, just how like it's like a black hole is. The way that time moves differently for you near a black hole, it's the same thing in performance, And it's actually my advice then was do as Eliane Radig did when she was doing her compositions. And there's that it's like one of my favourite videos on the whole internet. It's this brilliant little mini documentary about her. She's old now and no longer creates electronic music, but she's still got her ARP 2500, and she's still got all of the sheets where it was how she did these compositions, which were these very like long drones, and she has a stopwatch, and in French she says it's my teddy bear. My teddy bear was the stopwatch because it was nice. It was my comforter. If I had this, then I knew exactly when to turn, when to stop, when to do this, when to change a setting. We all need one of those.
Yeah, I think it's that thing with time, but also, is this interesting? Is anybody interested in this really? Or is it just me? And then the only thing you can resort to is what you find interesting, because that's all you have in that moment.
Trust in yourself.
And just hope that it's not catastrophe.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I've had two situations, one where it was, I think, a catastrophe, but I can't really tell, but I have a feeling it was from their point of view. I don't really know. And then another where somebody said that they could have listened to it for hours. Well, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. It's like when you see bands play, or if you know the band and you talk to them afterwards, everyone think the only thing anyone always says is, we messed up in that bit on that song.
That's right.
And then all anyone says in response is, what? Like, what bit? Like, it was fine.
Yeah, and that I think with when nobody could possibly have heard what you've done ever before.
Then
sort of live electronic music is really a gift in a way.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it depends how nailed down or precise things have to be. But again, working with the girls, that's really nice because they can perform something and no one knows whether they've made a mistake. They know what they're trying to do, but they're experiencing performance no differently from us. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Yes. Thanks, Liz. Is she not ace? Really good to chat to Liz. And I really enjoyed, it's been interesting talking to someone who is not necessarily a music artist in the like traditional sense. There is a whole other facet of education and inspiration. There are people who are working in these fields tirelessly, also connected, very, very connected, obviously completely connected to music technology and electronic music, but in a slightly different discipline, in a sense, in the pursuit of education, which is hugely important and fascinating, and is what I do on my YouTube channel. So it was a bit of a sort of, I'm an idiot when I was like, of course I should talk to Liz for the podcast. Not least that I think the Yorkshire Sound Women Network is sound. So it's a really good thing. I want to ape that point that she made, which is it's not about taking cake away. It's about making extra cake to help new people come into this field that we all love and enjoy. That thing she was saying was kind of like the heart of the matter, is that one of the most important things is giving access to tools and having a safe space in which to play with them, to make mistakes. Because this is something that I think about, and again, I've been thinking about it with Frank, is like, what do I need to give him, and at what age and in what circumstances to make him be interested in playing with electronic music equipment like I was? As I talked to Liz in the podcast, there's that moment where I sort of diverged and talk about, the route I took, and my brother's basically playing me music, and my brother had an MC303 and he had an MPC 2000, but really it was that MC303, which I've actually got that MC303 now. Thanks, Matt. And that having a brother, i.e. having access to that, and just him being fine with me just taking it off into my room and just putting on a pair of headphones and just playing with the device, I was allowed to do that. That is what gave me the impetus to think, I've had some successful music making experience with this one device. I want more of that. And I was fortunate, extremely fortunate, to be left some money from my great uncle after he died, and I plowed that money into music technology equipment and never looked back. But what happens if you don't have that brother? And what happens if you go to somewhere, an event or something like that, and it's scary and there's no one like you. There's absolutely no one like you at that event. And maybe someone says something that's inappropriate or upsetting or, wrong or a little bit, they didn't think it through. And despite not meaning, ill by it, unfortunately, you just can't help how you feel. And you just think, maybe this isn't for me. Making it hard in any way to get into something is not good and is unnecessary. And so, this whole thing is about, can we make a safe space and support people who don't feel comfortable in the environments that have already existed? Because the reality is, the split that we currently have in this industry is wrong. It's, again, music. It's just music. And there's nothing boyish about music. It's just music. So we're doing something wrong, or we have been. Everyone's capable of saying a silly thing or not thinking something through. And it's up to all of us to try and be cool, be super cool, and just make this a welcoming space. As I said before we listened to the podcast, what could be better than sharing the best hobby in the world? Check out the Audio Equity Pledge and check out the links. There's some really good stuff if you're looking for ways to contribute and help. There's loads of different ways that you can. So that's it. For me, Rachel and Frank. Love you.